Private Marcus Chun stood elbow-deep in greasy dishwater at Forward Operating Base Sentinel, his slight frame dwarfed by the industrial kitchen around him. Steam rose from the massive sinks as he scrubbed another tray of metal plates, the monotonous task having consumed his days for the past 3 weeks. At 19, he looked even younger, barely old enough to shave, with intelligent dark eyes that most of his fellow soldiers never bothered to notice. The kitchen bustled around him with the controlled chaos of feeding 800 personnel 3 times a day. Sergeant Rodriguez, the head cook, barked orders at the kitchen staff while privates hauled 50-pound sacks of potatoes and stirred enormous vats of soup. But Marcus remained invisible in his corner, relegated to the most menial tasks as punishment for what his commanding officer had termed insubordination. The morning sun streamed through the small windows high above, casting long shadows across the concrete floor. Outside, he could hear the distant sounds of his former unit conducting training exercises. Rifle fire echoing across the desert, drill sergeants shouting commands, the rumble of armored vehicles. It was the world he'd been exiled from, the world where he'd once thought he belonged. Nobody paid attention to the quiet kid with kitchen duty. They saw him as just another screw-up, another young soldier who couldn't handle the pressure of real military service. What they didn't see was how his eyes tracked every conversation, how his ears picked up fragments of radio chatter from the communications room next door, how his mind automatically processed and cataloged every piece of information that floated through the busy kitchen. The punishment, the incident that had landed Marcus in kitchen purgatory, had occurred 3 weeks earlier during a tactical briefing. Captain Morrison had been outlining the standard approach to a reconnaissance mission when Marcus had quietly raised his hand. "Sir, with respect, wouldn't a flanking maneuver from the eastern ridge provide better cover and visual advantage?" The briefing room had fallen silent. Morrison's face had reddened as 20 pairs of eyes turned toward the youngest member of the unit. For a private to question tactical decisions in front of seasoned soldiers was considered the height of disrespect. "Private Chun," Morrison had said, his voice dangerously quiet, "did I ask for input from someone who's been in the Army for exactly 4 months? No, sir, but the terrain maps show. The terrain maps show exactly what I tell them to show. You're not here to think, Private. You're here to follow orders." The other soldiers had exchanged glances, some smirking at Marcus's rookie mistake. Staff Sergeant Williams had shaken his head in disapproval. Even his bunkmate, Private Jackson, had looked embarrassed for him. But Marcus had seen something in the satellite photos that the others had missed. A detail that suggested their planned route would expose them to potential enemy observation posts. His mind had processed the topographical data instantly, running calculations that most soldiers would need computers to perform. "Kitchen duty," Morrison had announced. "Indefinite assignment. Maybe washing dishes will teach you some humility." And so Marcus had found himself banished to the kitchen, stripped of his weapon, his gear, his place among the soldiers. The punishment was designed to break his spirit, to teach him his place in the military hierarchy. What it had actually done was give him unprecedented access to the nerve center of the base's information flow. Hidden talents. Marcus's journey to this moment had begun long before he'd ever set foot on a military base. The son of immigrant parents who'd fled political persecution in their homeland, he'd grown up in a household where 5 languages were spoken fluently. His mother, a former linguistics professor, had taught him Mandarin and Cantonese. His father, a political refugee, had ensured he learned Russian and Arabic. English had been his school language, but even that he'd mastered with an academic precision that set him apart from his peers. By age 12, Marcus had been reading intercepted news broadcasts online, teaching himself to decode the subtle propaganda techniques used by various governments. By 16, he'd been accepted to MIT with a full scholarship for computational linguistics. But his parents' sudden death in a car accident had changed everything. The military had offered structure, purpose, and a way to honor their sacrifice through service. What the Army didn't know, what Marcus had never mentioned in his recruitment interviews, was that he'd spent 2 years at MIT before enlisting. 2 years studying cryptography, signal processing, and advanced linguistic analysis. The professors had called him a prodigy. His thesis on pattern recognition in multilingual encrypted communications had earned attention from government agencies that didn't officially exist. But Marcus had walked away from it all. The academic world had felt disconnected from real purpose after his parents' death. He'd wanted to serve, to make a difference with his hands as well as his mind. The military had seemed like the perfect fit for someone who understood that true service sometimes meant accepting roles that didn't showcase your full potential. Now, standing in the kitchen with dish soap up to his elbows, Marcus wondered if he'd made a mistake. The intellectual stimulation he craved was nowhere to be found in the repetitive tasks of food service. But his mind remained active, constantly processing the streams of information that flowed through the base's central hub. The Discovery the Kitchen occupied a strategic position within the base's command structure. Located directly below the communications center and adjacent to the officers' briefing room, it served as an unintentional gathering point for information. Radio chatter filtered down through the ventilation system. Officers discussed classified matters over coffee, assuming the kitchen staff were too busy or too uninterested to pay attention. Marcus had been noticing patterns for weeks. Fragments of conversations that didn't quite fit together, radio protocols that seemed slightly off, communication schedules that deviated from standard patterns. His linguistically trained ear picked up subtle inconsistencies that others missed entirely. It started with the morning radio check that echoed down from the communications room above. Every day at 0600 hours, the base's radio operators conducted standard communication protocols with surrounding outposts. Marcus had memorized the routine, call signs, frequency changes, authentication codes. It had become as familiar as his own heartbeat. But on this particular Tuesday morning, something was different. The authentication sequence from Outpost Charlie had contained an extra phrase. Just 4 words in what sounded like routine military jargon. But Marcus's ear caught the anomaly immediately. The phrase was in Arabic, buried within English military terminology so seamlessly that it would be invisible to anyone not fluent in both languages. Marcus froze, his hands still in the dishwater. He replayed the sequence in his mind, analyzing each syllable. The Arabic phrase translated roughly to night movement confirmed. But Outpost Charlie wasn't scheduled for any night operations according to the duty roster he'd glimpsed yesterday. He forced himself to continue washing dishes, his mind racing. Could it have been a mistake? A linguistic slip by one of the radio operators? But the phrase had been too perfectly integrated into the English communication pattern. Someone had deliberately embedded Arabic code words into routine military communications. Over the next hour, Marcus listened with new intensity to every radio transmission that filtered down from the communications center. His years of linguistic training had taught him to identify patterns in speech that most people would miss entirely. Slight variations in accent, unusual grammatical structures, embedded phrases in foreign languages. By lunchtime, he'd identified 12 more anomalies. Arabic phrases woven into routine communications, appearing to originate from 3 different outposts. But these weren't random mistakes. They formed a pattern, a secondary communication network operating parallel to official military channels. Marcus's blood ran cold as the implications became clear. Someone was using the military's own radio network to coordinate activities that weren't appearing on any official schedules or duty rosters. Pattern recognition. That afternoon, Marcus approached his kitchen duties with renewed focus. He positioned himself near the dishwashing station that offered the clearest acoustic connection to the communications room above. Every transmission, every fragment of conversation became data to be analyzed and cataloged. His mind worked like a supercomputer, processing multiple streams of information simultaneously. The Arabic phrases were appearing in a specific pattern, always during routine communications, always embedded within standard military terminology, always from the same 3 outposts. But when he mentally mapped the locations of those outposts, they formed a triangle around a strategically significant valley that intelligence reports had identified as a potential enemy infiltration route. The embedded messages weren't random communications. They were coordination signals for some kind of operation that wasn't appearing on any official channels. Marcus began mentally documenting everything. The times of transmission, the specific Arabic phrases used, the call signs of the operators involved. His memory, trained through years of academic study, captured details that would have required recording equipment for most people to retain accurately. By evening, the pattern had become undeniable. The embedded communications were increasing in frequency, and the Arabic phrases were becoming more specific. References to movement times, equipment requirements, personnel numbers. Someone was using the military's own communication network to coordinate an operation that bypassed all official command structures. But who and why? Marcus spent the night lying in his bunk, staring at the ceiling as his mind processed the possibilities. The Arabic phrases could indicate enemy infiltration of the communication network. Foreign agents could have compromised the radio operators at the 3 outposts, but the language patterns suggested native speakers, people who understood both Arabic and English military terminology with equal fluency. The alternative was more disturbing. The communications could be coming from within the military itself. Personnel who were using their access to official channels to coordinate unauthorized activities. But that would require knowledge of radio protocols, access to military equipment, and detailed understanding of base operations. Either scenario represented a massive security breach with potentially catastrophic consequences. The critical moment the next morning brought a development that changed everything. Marcus was cleaning the coffee station near the officers' briefing room when Captain Morrison entered with 2 men he didn't recognize. They wore civilian clothes but carried themselves with military bearing. Their conversation was conducted in low tones, but Marcus's trained ear caught fragments. Increased chatter from the Valley region. Assets in position by Thursday. Coordination with local elements. One of the civilians was examining satellite photographs spread across the briefing table. Marcus caught a glimpse of the images as he refilled the coffee machine aerial views of the same valley region that had appeared in his mental map of the communication anomalies. The intercepts are concerning. One civilian was saying, "Someone's using military frequencies for unauthorized coordination." Morrison's response chilled Marcus to the bone. "Could be enemy infiltration of our communication network. We'll need to implement complete communication blackout protocols until we identify the source." Communication blackout. That meant shutting down all radio contact with forward outposts, including the 3 positions that Marcus had identified as sources of the embedded Arabic messages. If those outposts were compromised by enemy agents, cutting communication would leave them isolated and vulnerable. But if the communications were legitimate military operations being conducted through unofficial channels, the blackout could interfere with critical missions. Marcus realized he was holding information that could resolve the crisis. His linguistic analysis had identified patterns that the official intelligence apparatus had missed. The embedded Arabic communications weren't random enemy infiltration. They followed specific protocols that suggested coordination with legitimate military objectives. But he was just a private on kitchen duty. A soldier who'd been exiled from his unit for speaking out of turn. Who would believe him? And how could he present his analysis without revealing that he'd been conducting unauthorized surveillance of military communications? The weight of the knowledge pressed down on him as he mechanically continued his cleaning duties. Men's lives could depend on the decision being made in that briefing room. The wrong choice could result in disaster for forward positions or compromise ongoing operations. Marcus made his decision. Taking action that evening, as the base settled into its nighttime routine, Marcus made his way to the communications center. His kitchen duties had given him detailed knowledge of the base's security protocols and guard rotations. He knew exactly when the communications room would be minimally staffed. The duty officer was Sergeant Peterson, a career soldier who'd always treated Marcus with casual indifference rather than outright hostility. Peterson was monitoring routine evening communications when Marcus knocked on the door frame. "Private Chin." Peterson looked up from his equipment, surprised. "Kitchen duty doesn't extend to communications." "Sergeant, I need to report something urgent. About the radio communications." Peterson's expression shifted to skepticism. What would kitchen duty know about communications? Marcus took a deep breath. "I've been listening to the transmissions from the 3 forward outposts. There are embedded Arabic phrases in the routine communications, but they're not enemy infiltration. They're coordination signals for a legitimate operation that's being conducted off the official channels." "That's..." Peterson started to dismiss him, then paused. "What Arabic phrases?" Marcus began reciting the specific transmissions he'd memorized, translating the embedded phrases and explaining their context within the standard military communications. Peterson's expression grew increasingly serious as Marcus demonstrated detailed knowledge of communication protocols that no kitchen worker should possess. "How do you know Arabic?" Peterson asked. "My parents were refugees. I grew up speaking 5 languages. I also spent 2 years studying computational linguistics at MIT before I enlisted." Peterson stared at him. "MIT? I can provide you with detailed analysis of the communication patterns. The embedded messages aren't enemy infiltration. They're too sophisticated and too perfectly integrated with military protocols. Someone with official access is using Arabic code words to coordinate activities that aren't appearing on standard channels. Why didn't you report this through proper channels?" Marcus's smile was rueful. "I'm on kitchen duty for questioning tactical decisions. Who's going to listen to a private who's been exiled for insubordination?" Peterson was quiet for a moment, considering. The evening communications were routine and quiet, giving him time to focus on Marcus's information. "Show me exactly what you've observed." For the next hour, Marcus laid out his analysis. The pattern of embedded communications, the translation of Arabic phrases, the timing correlation with increased activity in the Valley region. Peterson verified several of the transmissions in the communication logs, confirming that Marcus's observations were accurate. This is sophisticated analysis," Peterson admitted. "You've identified patterns that our intelligence officers missed, because they weren't listening for Arabic embedded in English military communications. And they probably don't have the linguistic background to catch the subtle integration." Peterson was reaching for his phone when the radio crackled with an emergency transmission. "Base Command, this is Outpost Charlie. We have eyes on significant enemy movement in the valley. Request immediate extraction for reconnaissance team." Marcus grabbed Peterson's arm. "Don't respond normally. Use the Arabic authentication phrase from this morning's embedded communication." "What?" "Trust me. If I'm right about the coordination signals, they'll recognize the phrase and understand that someone at Base Command is aware of their operation." Peterson hesitated, then keyed the microphone. He repeated Outpost Charlie's transmission, then added the Arabic phrase that Marcus had identified from the morning's communication. The response was immediate. "Base Command, authentication confirmed. Reconnaissance team has identified enemy staging area. Request tactical air support for coordinates we're transmitting now." Peterson's eyes widened. "They're conducting authorized reconnaissance using unofficial communication protocols. Probably black operations," Marcus confirmed. "Activities that need to stay off official channels for operational security. The Arabic coding was their way of maintaining secure communication without using standard encryption that could be compromised." Peterson was already calling the communications officer. "Sir, we have a situation that requires immediate attention. I need you in the communications center now. Recognition and resolution within 30 minutes. The communications center was filled with officers. Captain Morrison arrived looking annoyed at being awakened, followed by the 2 civilians from the morning briefing. Marcus stood in the corner, suddenly aware that his analysis had triggered a crisis at the highest levels of Base Command. "Explain the situation, Sergeant," Morrison ordered. Peterson gestured toward Marcus. Private Chun identified patterns in radio communications that indicate authorized operations being conducted through unofficial channels. He's provided detailed linguistic analysis that resolves the communication anomalies we've been tracking. Morrison's eyes fixed on Marcus with recognition and confusion. "Private Chan? The soldier on kitchen duty?" "Sir, Private Chun has identified Arabic code phrases embedded in routine military communications. His analysis indicates coordination signals for legitimate reconnaissance operations in the Valley region." One of the civilians stepped forward. "Private, explain your methodology." Marcus found himself at the center of attention from officers whose clearance levels far exceeded his own. He carefully outlined his linguistic background, his observations of communication patterns, and his analysis of the embedded Arabic phrases. "You're saying you conducted this analysis while washing dishes?" the civilian asked. "Yes, sir. The kitchen has acoustic access to communications, and my linguistic training allowed me to identify patterns that weren't visible to standard monitoring. The civilian exchanged glances with his partner. Private Chun, do you understand the significance of the operations you've identified? I understand that lives are at stake, sir, and that cutting communications with the forward outposts could compromise ongoing missions. Morrison's expression had transformed from annoyance to something approaching respect. Private, your earlier tactical suggestion about the Eastern Ridge approach. Where did that analysis come from? Topographical pattern recognition, sir. The same analytical methods I used for the communication patterns. And your academic background. 2 years at MIT Computational Linguistics program. I specialized in pattern recognition in multilingual encrypted communications. The briefing room fell silent. Morrison looked at the civilians, who nodded almost imperceptibly. Private Chun, Morrison said formally, your analysis has identified a critical intelligence operation and prevented a potentially catastrophic communication blackout. Your linguistic skills and analytical capabilities represent resources that have been underutilized. Yes, sir. Consider your kitchen duty terminated. Report to intelligence briefing at 0600 tomorrow. You'll be working directly with our cryptographic analysis team. Sir. One of the civilians stepped forward. Private Chen, how would you feel about putting your MIT education to use in service of your country? Marcus looked around the room at the faces of officers who 12 hours earlier had seen him as just another kitchen worker. His mind was already processing the possibilities. The chance to use his full capabilities in service of something larger than himself. I'd be honored, sir. Epilogue 6 months later, Staff Sergeant Marcus Chun stood in the Advanced Communications Center of Joint Task Force Headquarters, monitoring multiple data streams simultaneously. His workstation displayed real-time linguistic analysis of intercepted communications in 7 languages, pattern recognition algorithms he'd developed personally, and tactical assessments that had become essential to operations across 3 theaters. The promotion had come with his new assignment. His linguistic abilities and analytical skills had proven invaluable to intelligence operations that required sophisticated understanding of multilingual communications. The quiet kid who'd been exiled to kitchen duty had become one of the military's most valuable intelligence assets. Captain Morrison entered the communications center, now serving as Marcus's direct supervisor in his new role. Their relationship had evolved from antagonistic to mutually respectful, built on Morrison's recognition that tactical innovation often came from unexpected sources. Chun, we've got new intercepts from the Syrian theater. Arabic embedded in Farsi communications, possibly coordinating with English-speaking assets. Marcus nodded, his fingers already moving across his keyboard. I'll have preliminary analysis within the hour, full pattern recognition by end of day. Outstanding. Your work on the Valley operations saved 3 reconnaissance teams and led to neutralization of a major enemy staging area. Just doing my job, sir. Morrison smiled. Your job now involves a lot more than washing dishes. Marcus looked around the Advanced Communications Center, with its sophisticated equipment and team of analysts who looked to him for linguistic expertise that had proven crucial to multiple successful operations. His exile to kitchen duty had inadvertently positioned him to discover intelligence that traditional monitoring had missed. His punishment had become the foundation for capabilities that now served at the highest levels of military intelligence. The quiet kid who nobody had noticed had been hiding talents that would reshape how the military approached multilingual intelligence analysis. Sometimes the most dangerous people, and the most valuable ones, were those no one saw coming. Outside, he could hear the sounds of training exercises, young soldiers learning the basics of military service. Some of them, he knew, would have hidden talents waiting to be discovered. Skills that didn't fit traditional military categories but could prove invaluable when the right circumstances revealed them. Marcus returned his attention to the Arabic-Farsi communication intercepts, his mind already identifying patterns that would take others hours to recognize. The kitchen had taught him humility, but it had also taught him that service came in many forms. Sometimes the most important contributions came from the shadows, from the places where nobody thought to look. The dishwasher had become a master of linguistic intelligence. The punishment had revealed the gift, and the quiet kid nobody noticed had found his place at the center of operations that protected lives across multiple continents. His story had become legend within intelligence circles. The private who'd been exiled to kitchen duty and ended up saving missions through linguistic analysis that no one else could perform. But Marcus knew the real lesson wasn't about hidden talents or dramatic revelations. It was about the value of seeing potential where others saw only problems, of recognizing that service took many forms, and understanding that sometimes the most important discoveries came from the most unexpected places. The kitchen had been his exile, but it had also been his beginning.